We got a lot to talk about today, including this question of who exactly is in charge in the White House. Only because it seems whatever he says, you got a White House that's quite willing, ready, and able to say, no, that's not the case after the fact. He said he'd be willing to commit U.S. troops to fight China, to protect Taiwan. And the White House is scrambling, saying, no change in policy. We've got to talk about what that's really about. Plus, this border mess just keeps on getting worse. The Democrats are digging in, trying to insist somehow that this was not humanitarian to send all these migrants, these Venezuelan immigrants, to Martha's Vineyard. But of course, they just swept them out of there on planes in the middle of the night. And that's humanitarian? You gotta really question the hypocrisy on this one. We're gonna talk about all of it today. It's good to have you here. Make sure that you have downloaded this podcast. Make sure that you have subscribed to it on Apple iTunes or on Spotify. Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals than right now. So go to legacypminvestments.com for more. Again, legacypminvestments.com. The Fed is out tomorrow with its new interest rate plan. One expects that we'll see 75 to maybe a full basis point, 75 basis points to a full one. But what's amazing is that somehow, some way, Joe Biden still hasn't figured out that inflation is really and truly a problem for the American people. Instead, he just completely downplayed it. I think it's a really big political mistake, but you decide for yourself here. Watch.
Sir, with the Federal Reserve rapidly raising interest rates, what can you do to prevent a recession?
Continue to grow the economy. And we're growing the economy. It's growing in a way that it hasn't in years and years.
Are you kidding me? You're kidding me, right? Because actually, the last I checked, we're in the classic definition of a recession. Now, I realize you're not allowed to say these things. Somehow that's fake news, even though every textbook definition and every Econ 101 class will tell you that 2 consecutive quarters equals a recession. I mean, that's not growth, buddy, okay? I'm hoping you can turn it around, but let's just be honest with each other. This is such a mistake. We're going to get into the massive political mistake the Democrats keep making by trying to ignore real issues. Things like inflation, things like concerns about what it would mean for our children should there be a real problem with Taiwan. We have to get into all of that. But before I do, you heard me talk about inflation. The president doesn't think there is any. There's a group out there that actually cares very much about these policies, that cares very much about protecting Americans from all this inflation. The group is AMAC. I think it's something you should look at joining. It's the Association of Mature American Citizens. And they, together with 2.4 million other Americans, are working on your behalf to ensure that you're going to have an economic future in this country. That's why policy is so important. That's why leadership is so important. So go check them out. I say they're sort of like the conservative version of the AARP. Check them out. They've got lots of things that will be very beneficial to you, but importantly, you're helping to advance a cause that I know you believe in. amac.us/Regan, $16 a year. You get all kinds of freebies, travel, discounts, hotel, restaurants, all that good stuff. So do check them out. But let's talk a little bit about inflation here ahead of what we should expect to see from the Federal Reserve. The Fed is trying to rein this thing in, right? It's a problem. It's a huge problem because we have so much inflation now, upwards of 8%. And it's been consistently very, very high now for the last, year. I mean, it's just inched higher and higher and higher. And you've got a president who's trying to say, I've got it coming down a little bit. In fact, he said it's actually just grown like an inch. Well, that's not actually true. The more he downplays this, the bigger a problem it is for everyday voters who are like, well, you clearly don't get what I am facing every day, every week. Energy prices are soaring. I mean, even though they'll tell you they're coming down, they're still so high over where they were last year. And I would expect that as we go into the winter season, given what's going on globally, you're going to continue to see escalated levels there in energy prices. So you got energy prices high, food prices high. I mean, the cost of diapers is way up. This is what Americans are facing. And yet the president's trying to brush it off as though it's really no big deal. That's a mistake. There's things like the border that, you can't pretend don't exist. You know that Kamala Harris keeps telling us the border is secure. It's not secure when more than 2 million people are coming in illegally. So what Ron DeSantis did, what Governor Abbott there in Florida is doing by sending all of these immigrants to other locations in the United States, what they're doing is they're highlighting the problem in a way that makes it relevant for those populations and therefore relevant for those politicians. It's easy to sit in your ivory tower, whether you're on the Federal Reserve worrying about interest rates or whether you're in government and you're far, far away in Massachusetts or in Washington, D.C. or in Chicago from the challenge that Texas is facing at the border. It's very easy to say, oh, Texas, you ought to just make it work. Well, Texas can't make it work. You know why? They don't have the money. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the wherewithal. And they don't have a commitment from their federal government to try and make it work. Our border is broken. It's very, very clear. But our federal government, they don't care. The federal government does not care. And that's what they keep telling us over and over and over again, to the point where somehow Ron DeSantis is compared to some of the most heinous people in history. I do believe we heard Ken Burns, a documentary maker, well-known, start to make some comparisons there between what happened in World War II and what Germany did and where we are today. I mean, that is just a slap in the face, frankly, to history. It really speaks volumes about how aggressive I think the other side is willing to be on this issue. They know they're losing Hispanics. It's been proven over and over again in the polling and in some elections there in Texas. And so they're freaking out. But I want to get back to what I started with. We really do, as a country, have to think about who's running the show, because I find it very peculiar that the president of the United States will actually come out and say something like, and let me give you the exact wording, the reporter said to him, hey, would you actually do this differently, for example, than what we saw in Ukraine? Would this actually involve U.S. troops? To which the president said yes. And that's quite a statement. In the past, we've been pretty ambiguous, if you would, when it comes to what we would do in the event that China became a problem with Taiwan. But the president cut through that noise, maybe in a rare moment of clarity for him, but not in a way that was helpful to our country and to the challenges that we now face with China. So he was asked by the reporter whether or not U.S. forces would defend the democratically governed Taiwan in the event of an attack by China. And he said, and I quote, yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack. So the reporter went back and said, to clarify, would that mean that unlike in Ukraine, where we aren't actually using U.S. forces, would this mean that American men and women would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion? To which the president replied, yes. So pretty straightforward. But it sent the White House into a bit of a tizzy where they're trying to now walk it back however they can, saying that our policy has not changed. This happened before. He actually ran into this just a few months ago. And you'd think that they would have their signals kind of worked out, unless he just forgets. But I think it's sort of weird that our president is not being backed up by his staff. Isn't that a little like a CEO of a company who says something and Wall Street freaks out, and then all of a sudden you get everybody at the company saying, no, he didn't really mean it. He didn't really mean it. Elon Musk didn't really mean that he wants to buy Twitter. Look, as the president of the United States, when you say something, it is not becoming to have your administration say, well, what he really meant was the following. And yet this is what they do over and over and over again to him, which makes you wonder what's really going on, okay? I mean, I think he said what he had to say. I think that's the position we have. But nonetheless, why are they trying so hard to tone it down? If that's the case, then give them a better script, put Kamala Harris or Chuck Schumer out there saying these sorts of things. You don't want to have to undermine your own president. It really does sort of speak to the issue of who's in charge, but we've kind of been wondering that for a while, given that he doesn't understand inflation, given that he does not understand this border mess, and given that he's willing to say things on the international front that clearly others in the administration do not want him to say. So good to have you here as always. Do me a favor, make sure that you go to trishintel.com. That is my website. You can get all your news and information there and sign up for my newsletter. Make sure that you sign up and subscribe to this podcast, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.